This is Financial Standard, the definitive source of news, thought leadership and analysis for Australian wealth management professionals. Financial Standard. Take the lead.
Welcome to the Financial Standard podcast. I'm Financial Standard journalist Andrew McKean with FAAA General Manager of Policy, Advocacy and Standards, Phil Anderson. Welcome, Phil.
Great to be here. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Now, the FAAA has made a submission to Treasury on draft legislation for delivering better financial advice, Tranche 2. Look, there was a very comprehensive submission as well. Look, I thought I would start with one of your key points, and that's on retirement planning advice and collective charging. And the FAAA seems to strongly oppose collective charging for retirement planning advice due to its complexity, potential anti-competitive effects. What specific measures would you propose to ensure that funds provide only simple advice under collective charging arrangements?
Well, that's a very a good question, but a challenging one. Right throughout the whole QAR and DBFO process, we've been focusing on an appreciation of what simple advice is, so that, and we believe firmly that intra-fund or collectively charged advice should be simple advice. We believe that the advice that's provided by the new class of provider, which we haven't yet seen the draft legislation for, should be simple advice. So we do see merit in both collective charging and the new class of provider, provided it is focused on simple advice. The challenge then is, how do you define what simple advice is? And you can, and we've set out in our submission a range of considerations that might be considered as part of that assessment. But we have concluded that retirement planning advice is never going to be simple. It's always going to be costly. It's always going to need to think about a range of broader issues that mightn't be so easy to identify. So you're looking at other sources of assets. You're looking at sources of income. You're looking at family relationships. You're looking at access to government benefits. It's a complex piece of advice. So we don't have the answer on how to definitively come up with a robust definition of simple advice, but we've got a very clear statement out of this submission that retirement planning advice is not simple advice. It's always going to be complex. And for that reason, it shouldn't be provided by the new class of provider, and it shouldn't be provided under collective charging, because for a range of reasons, we think that's unfair to other members for complex and costly advice to be charged on a collective basis.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that leads perfectly into my next point, and that is how the government can balance the need for affordable advice with your concern that collective charging for retirement advice could lead to potential cross-subsidisation and also double charging for members who already have professional advisors, which wouldn't be particularly fair on them.
No, and that's a point that we've made strongly through this submission, is that why should you have to pay twice? We don't think there's a problem with super funds providing retirement planning advice. The full obligations will apply when they're doing that. So whether it's advice provided by a professional financial advisor, or in the future, there's other options of who could be the provider. The point, though, is that it needs to be professional advice. It will involve the full obligation, so the best interest duty, the advice disclosure, conflicted remuneration, code of ethics, education standard, and so on. It involves all of those, but we think that it should be framed as a separately charged cost, and super funds can come up with packages for people to seek retirement planning advice. And if their circumstances are simpler than others, then they can do that in a very cost-effective way. We just think that we're happy that super funds will be have professional advisors provide retirement planning advice, but it should be charged for individually and not charged across the member base.
No, definitely. You also highlighted the risk of super funds recommending only their own products under collective charging as well. Is there any safeguards in your submission that could be implemented to ensure that members are informed potentially about alternative products, or also nudged or encouraged to seek independent advice as well? What's the incentive, I suppose, for the super fund to do that, which would be in the best interest of their members?
Yeah, so we have identified that there is a genuine risk there, and conflicts of interest is an overall obligation that advice providers have, and it's a specific obligation that is in the Code of Ethics. So it's different from a professional external financial advisor who can choose from a much broader range of products, as opposed to someone who's providing intra-fund advice. If they're providing intra-fund advice, they cannot consider external products. If a financial advisor working for a super fund is charging for that advice, they can consider external products. And it may be in a range of circumstances that it is necessary for an advisor within a super fund to consider external products. For example, if there's merit for that particular client in considering an annuity product, but that super fund doesn't have access to a product like that, they might do an annuity type product in combination with an account-based pension. They should have the ability to consider external products.
The FAAA, and this is pertaining to super nudges and consumer protection, your point on that. The FAAA recommended that super nudges include disclaimers, avoid specific recommendations, particularly for retirement advice. Could you elaborate on potentially any ideal informational nudge, what that would look like, particularly for members approaching retirement age? What would you like to see from that?
So we do recognise that there is merit in this concept of super nudges. You can go to the marketplace and see statistics on the number of people who are above 65 and still have their super in retirement, in accumulation phase, where they have the opportunity to move it into retirement phase, into pension phase, and pay less tax. So we do recognise that across the broader membership base of super funds, there are people who would benefit significantly from getting advice. We are concerned about how those nudges might lead to decisions being made, and we want to make sure that there is careful consideration before decisions are actually made as the result of a nudge. So we're a little bit conscious about how this proposal would allow recommendations to be made to classes of members, and they could be done in a way where all the obligations that flow from personal advice do not apply. So the best interest duty wouldn't apply. The requirement to provide advice documentation wouldn't apply, as would Code of Ethics and Education Standard. So we are saying that there should be sensible controls around that is cognizant of consumer protections. And if ultimately super nudges play the role to encourage people to consider their personal situations, the products that they have available, if it makes people go and seek advice, then it serves a good purpose. So as long as people understand that they need to think more broadly before acting, and that the nudge is a nudge and it motivates them to do more, then that's a good outcome.
This is now just turning to principles-based regulation, and the FAAA was advocating for a principles-based regulatory regime that allows advisors to rely on their professional judgment, and that's understandable given the education requirements that you as an industry have to go through. How can ASIC be encouraged to shift from perhaps what could be described as a historically prescriptive approach to align with that vision? And is there any challenges you foresee in making that a reality as well?
There are substantial challenges in making that a reality. The law at the moment is very prescriptive. Whether it's you're looking at the safe harbour and ASIC's requirements around complying with safe harbour for the best interest duty, you've got document, you've got to have evidence of your compliance with each of the steps. We have had, over a period of time, a number of ASIC reports and guidance that has led to licensees taking a very prescriptive approach to how advisors comply with their obligations. So that's built up over time. It's led to additional obligations being added to statements of advice. And it's also led to licensees being very risk averse. So they are not supportive or they haven't been supportive of a more principles-based approach where it was up to the advisor to decide how much record keeping was necessary, how much documentation around why the advice was appropriate for the client. That's what we want is a regime that recognises that financial advisors are professionals and that they are able to demonstrate their professional judgment. Now, to achieve this, the law has to reflect that. The explanatory memorandum to the bill needs to be very clear about that's the purpose. And it's only through that ASIC will have the capability and the confidence to change the way that they are monitoring, supervising and enforcing the law in the financial advice space. This is a significant change management exercise. We can't just go from a world where we've got a prescriptive regulator, we've got a prescriptive law, we've got risk-averse licensees, to one where everyone in the whole framework is comfortable that an advisor is able to rely upon their professional judgment. They can decide how much they need to document as to demonstrate why their advice is compliant with the law. We've got to help all of the stakeholders in this make that leap, but that's ultimately what we need to do to ensure that advice documents are significantly shorter, significantly more succinct and more meaningful for the clients who ultimately are the beneficiaries of those documents.
Towards the end of, I guess, sort of the key points that were in the submission. There was plenty in there, but one of them was the opportunity to utilise a record of advice, and that should be substantially expanded to better enable the use of streamlined form of financial advice. I was hoping you could expand a little bit on that point for me.
Records of advice are commonly used, but they are used under one particular mechanism, which is it is further advice on the basis of a previous statement of advice, but it can only be provided where the client's personal circumstances haven't changed materially or the basis of the advice hasn't changed materially. So that's quite constraining, and it means that there are limited circumstances where records of advice are being used. We're saying that as part of this reform, we've encouraged the government to have a very deep look at records of advice to make sure that they are being able to be used in a broader set of circumstances. So one of those is that there is a mechanism in the law, but is rarely used, where even for a new client, you don't need to provide a statement of advice if the amount that's being invested is less than $15,000. Now, that hasn't been indexed for years, and it's such a low threshold that it's no longer the sort of circumstances that an advisor would be likely to support a client with. So I've said increase that to $50,000. We've looked at other mechanisms where advice might be provided where there's no fee charged. So circumstances like when you've got clients, long-term clients, and they ask you to provide advice to their son or daughter about when they get their first job, about a super fund that they should put their super into. We would like to have the mechanism to do that in a very straightforward way without needing to provide a statement of advice. It's not a good solution for the advisor to turn around to the client and say, I can't help you with that because the law doesn't allow me to do it. So we're saying that now is the right time for the government and for all the stakeholders to look at how records of advice can be expanded, and it shouldn't just apply in the case of where an SOA has previously been provided.
More broadly on implementation itself, and I've nearly wrapped up, but that's, the FAAA has expressed, I would say, cautious optimism about the DBFO reforms. Obviously, disappointment with Tranche 2 Part A. What specific elements of Tranche 2 Part B are you most eager to see addressed to meet your expectations?
Yeah, so I guess from our perspective, the two main parts of Part B, if we're calling it Part B, is the repeal of the safe harbour and the rationalisation of the best interest duty. And one of the key parts of that is providing greater certainty about the ability to provide scoped or scaled advice, so that advisors have confidence that they don't need to investigate the client's full circumstances in order to provide that scaled advice, and that they don't need to extensively document the advice. So we want greater confidence for advisors to be able to provide simple advice in a very streamlined way, and that will be the mechanism to reduce the work and reduce the cost of providing that advice. So there are key parts of Part B. The other key part that hasn't come out yet, which is really important, is the government's proposals around enabling a new class of provider to provide financial advice. We've said we're prepared to support that, provided that the obligations that apply to that new class of provider are appropriately stringent, and that the advice that they provide is limited to simple advice. We do think there is merit in that proposal, to the extent that this will mean that it's a completely different cohort of potential consumers of financial advice will now have a chance to access advice. We don't envisage that the group of members and other stakeholders who might access this advice is likely to be the same as the cohort who are the clients of professional financial advisors. So this is making advice more available to a broader range of everyday Australians.
And that's a fantastic outcome, should it be successful. But I guess this is also contingent on, a lot of these issues have been circulating for several years, and progress has been, I would say, relatively slow. With an election having just wrapped up, and we'll have a new financial services minister coming in at some stage soon, how confident are you that, one, that these changes will be implemented, or at least most of them, and will that happen in a timely fashion as well?
Well, we're very keen to see this happen absolutely as soon as possible. If we get what we want out of these reforms, then we will see material benefits to the whole process of providing advice. The proof of that is yet to be demonstrated to us, and the government remains committed to this. I think it's important that they release this legislation before the election, and the former minister did that deliberately with an intent to show ongoing commitment to this. We will wait with absolute keen interest to see who the new minister is, but we very much look forward to working with them and doing everything that we can to fast forward the finalisation of this DBFO Tranche 2 package, so that as soon as possible that our members can access the benefits of that, and so can their clients. We have to remain optimistic that this will deliver material benefits, and we'll be working very hard to make sure that happens.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Phil.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to this Financial Standard podcast. For more information, visit financialstandard.com.au. Please keep in mind that the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature and does not consider personal circumstances. Reliance should not be placed on any content without further independent financial research and advice.